Kadosh Boker Tov, Masechet Rosh Hashana Daf Amud Aleph 8A1. Masechet Rosh Hashana. It says over here like this. We were just talking about Yovelot, right? Which is basically when we just said that there's Rosh Hashana for Yovel, that's also Talui B'Maaseh, which is not Chal unless you have Tkiyat Shofar. Because we says Ta'aviru Shofar Bechol Artechem, and that's when it's going to be done. Which means basically we just said that our Mishnah is not talking about anything which is Talui B'Maaseh, which are the Rosh Hashanim that are Talui B'Maaseh. Yovel is Talui B'Maaseh. They had to blow the shofar, and that's what makes it the Yovel. Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Yishma beno shel Rabbi Yochanan Memlokahi. This is Rabbi Yishma beno shel Rabbi Yishma, the son of Rabbi Yochanan Memloka, that he says that Yovel is going to be Chal already on the first of Tishri in the nighttime without any Maaseh. I mean, even though you're right, we do it later on. We do blow the shofar, but it's already going to be Chal the week before on Rosh Hashana, on the nighttime of Rosh Hashana. Says the Gemara, Ravashi, Amar Ravashi comes and he says, Arba'a Rosh Hashanim shehem be'arba'a Rosh Chodashim. No, you're right. There's 4 Rosh Hashanim which are on Rosh Chodesh, right? Really, it could be much more. But we're not going to add anything, right, which is not on Rosh Chodesh. So even though the Shtei Alechem, right, would have been on Shavuot, which is the 6th of Sivan, and even though the Korban HaOmer is on the 16th of Nisan, you could have added it. But it's not the answer because it needs a Maaseh, that we needed to do a Maaseh. Even without a Maaseh, forget about that answer. Really, Be'emet, it could be that there's another 2 Rosh Hashanahs. One on 6th of Sivan and one on 16th of Nisan. But we're only talking about the Rosh Hashanahs that fall out on Rosh Chodesh. We're not talking about other Rosh Hashanahs that fall out on other days. So there's 2 different answers how to answer up, right? Why is it that we didn't mention the other 2 Rosh Hashanahs, which is basically, which one?
Both.
So that's why we didn't bring it in our Mishnah. That's why we didn't bring it in our Mishnah.
What about Tu B'Shvat?
Yeah. Tu B'Shvat, no, because there was one Shita that it's Echa B'Shvat, which is Bet Shammai. That's what we did bring it down on the Mishnah, right? Because of that. Okay? So the Gemara is though going to ask, Be'echad B'Shvat ki Bet Shammai? So 1 second. So means according to that though, right? Even though I just answered it, right? What do we just say? We just said, 1 second, what about Tu B'Shvat? Because what, we're paskening like Bet Shammai? Right? At the end of the day, right? Jonathan just said, Tu B'Shvat. So he says, well, what about B'Cha B'Shvat? That means we pasken like Bet Shammai. Because if we're bringing down Tu B'Shvat, and we're saying that the Shita of Bet Shammai is B'Cha B'Shvat, right? So that means we're paskening like Bet Shammai. So he says, no, Hachi Kama. Shlosha is according to everybody. 3 of them is according to everybody. B'Cha B'Shvat is a machloket. And that's why we brought it down. Meaning, because there is a Shita, which is Bet Shammai, that it is on B'Cha B'Shvat, we also brought it down, even though that one's a machloket. The other 3 are according to everybody, because it's on Rosh Chodesh, right? It's on the Rosh Chodesh. Each one is Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Rosh Chodesh Tishri, Rosh Chodesh Elul, whichever one. But the one of the Tu B'Shvat is a machloket, Bet Shammai Bet Hillel. So that we're bringing down the machloket. Okay, very good. 2 dots. We just said Be'echad B'Tishri. Sorry, Be'echad Be'Elul was Rosh Hashanah for Maaser Be'ema. Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Shimon says Be'echad B'Tishri. So there's a machloket whether it's going to be Rosh Chodesh Elul or Tishri, but for sure it's Rosh Chodesh. The question is, Elul or Tishri, this is for Ma'asar Be'ema. What's Ma'asar Be'ema? Yeah? I take my behemoth. Yeah, I've got a few behemoth, yeah? I put them and I make them go through the door, one by one. And then when the 10th one comes, I make a big red X. Yeah? Everyone sees it. It's a big red X, okay? And then that one becomes Ma'asar. That's Ma'asar. That I give to the Kohen. Okay? So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, says Rabbi Yochanan, Ushnehem Yikra Echad Dershu. Whether you're learning it's Echad Be'elul or Echad B'Tishri, they're still learning it from the same pasuk. Why? Shneimar says in the pasuk, Laveshu Charim Atzon, there's a perek in Tehillim Samechei, Laveshu Charim Atzon, which means that Kivsot Atzon, they put on like flesh, which means they became pregnant, right? How do you have a sheep that becomes that puts on flesh? It's not that it got you gave it croissants and then it got bloated. You know what happened? It became pregnant. So now it puts on flesh. Yeah. So what happens? It starts getting covered with tvuah. Yitro'au, which means they're going to hear truot of simcha, meaning happiness. Af yashiru, they're going to be singing. So Rabbi Meir comes and he says like this. Rabbi Meir savar ematay lavshu charim atzon. When is it that the kifsot atzon are going be'ezona mitabrot? Which time do they become pregnant? Right? When do they become pregnant? Bizman shamakim yatfuvar. when the amakim, which means when the amakim, the emek, the valleys start getting covered with tzvua, which means that you could start seeing that they get, so that's when they become pregnant. Ba'adar, in the month of Adar, meaning that when or animals are not like human beings. A human being could become pregnant 24/7 in 365 days a year. Okay, obviously every single woman with her ovulation, everything, but I'm saying about the concept. She can become pregnant whenever it is. What? Availability, right? It means that she can become pregnant whenever it is. An animal does not become that. An animal, there's certain seasons which they could become pregnant. So when is the season which the animals could become pregnant? In Adar. So
each kind of animal is different.
Well, yes. Well, not all animals, but it depends. Certain animals have certain seasons. Certain animals have different time spans of pregnancy. Some animals, they're only pregnant for 5 months. Some animals for 9 months. Then it all depends on the animals, depends on the things. Sometimes a snake. A snake is once every 7 years. I'm saying, meaning that it all depends. Once every 7 years. A snake.
Thank God.
No comment.
Month of Adar. Mitabro Adar, Vyoldot Be'av. Why? Because these are sheep. Sheep are Be'ema Daka. Be'ema Daka, they give birth every 5 months. Right? That means basically they're small animals. They're not the big bulls or things like that. So therefore, every 5 months is a pregnancy. No, it becomes pregnant in Adar, and it gives birth in Av. Right? Why? Because it's a 5-month pregnancy.
Only in Adar they can become pregnant?
Yes, because that's the season.
It's once a year.
Once a year, 100%. Yeah. So he says, Rosh Hashana Shalaim.
Could become pregnant, or that they do become.
They do become pregnant. Yeah. What do you mean by could? I didn't understand the question.
It could only be.
Rosh Hashana Shalaim is Elul. So therefore, until they actually come, so it's Elul. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon say, when is it that they become pregnant? Is man shitro af yashiru. Ematai, when is that? Shibolim umrot shira. Benisan means they don't get pregnant in Nisan. In Adar, they get pregnant in Nisan. So obviously, if they get pregnant in Nisan, what do they give birth? Right? What?
5 months. 5 months later.
Yeah. So when is that?
Nisan.
Yeah.
Elul.
Nisan.
How could it be?
Nisan. We don't know.
One more time.
One
more time. Very good. Chazak Baruch. David, very good. One more time. If it's 5 month period, it cannot be Nisan to Iyar. You understand? Iyar is 1 month later, right? So if it's Adar, it's Av. So therefore, if it's Elul, it's if it's Nisan, it's Elul. So therefore, Rosh Hashana Tishi. So it means basically the machloket between them is from the exact same pasuk. They both learn that it's a 5 month period. The only question is, when is the time that they become pregnant? They become pregnant in Adar or in Nisan. If you hold they become pregnant in Adar, so then they give birth in Av, and therefore the Maaser is going to be in Elul. If you hold that they become pregnant in Nisan, so therefore they give birth in Elul, so then the Maaser is going to be in Tishri. So they both learn it from the exact same pasuk, right? That's what we're saying. They both learn it from the exact same pasuk. There's no difference. I just said the pasuk. Laveshu charim hatzon, right? V'amakim yatfu v'ari yitro'ahu af yashiru.
מה זה המעשר? המעשר the first 10?
Tilim.
The Maser you do 1 month after birth.
V'idach nami. Yeah, the other one also, it's written Yitro'af Yashiru. Yitro'af Yashiru is mashma that the kevasot are mitabrot, right, during the time of the 12 Nisan. So therefore, how does Rabbi Meir argue on this? So he says, no, ahu be'aflata dehavyam b'nisan. He says that part of the pasuk is talking about an afilot, which means that the kevasot are very, very few, which they do it later, which is in Nisan, which means the majority, according to the first shita, the majority of them become pregnant in Adar. There is a minority that they do it before. There's a minority. You understand? Sorry, that they do it afterwards. Afterwards. You understand? But the majority, they already did it. Vidach nami, and the other one it's written, V'amakim yatfuvar. So he says, that part of the pasuk is talking about the kevasot, which are charifot. What does it mean, charifot? Which means they come and they're very spicy. So they go running to the zachar, to the male, to become pregnant. So they become pregnant in Adar. So basically what happened was like this. Each one, right, it says, right, it all depends, right, on the concept of, right, yeah, he's jealous, yeah, so basically what happens is like this, yeah, it says, yeah, he comes and he says, right, if you're lucky, yeah, he says, yeah, he comes and he says, huh, yeah, he comes and he says, right, like this, he says, the ones, there are two shitot. We just said it's either going to be in Adar or it's going to be Nisan. So the one that held of Adar, he says, yeah, but there are some in Nisan. He says, yeah, those are the lazy ones. So that means they only come and they only mate later on in Nisan. The majority, they already did it during Adar. So I hold that Adar is the Ikar. The leftovers, yeah, okay, so they take their time. Fine. The next one was a Fuch. If you hold it's Nisan, but there are some that do Adar, he says, those are the feisty ones. Those are the ones that they, right? Zizim Makdimin Lemitzot. Yeah, the Kohanim. Yeah, they come, Zizim Makdimin Mitzot at the rush. So they go and they do the mitzvah. Okay? Next. Okay? Then it says,
relax.
right? Bishlema. Right? Bishlema leRabbi Meir. It's good according to Rabbi Meir. כי דכתיב את שושן הפסוק לבשו חרים הצאן בזמן שהמכים יטפובן. ויקנמי, but there's also יתרו אף ישירו. But according to Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, it should have been the opposite. איפכא מבעליה. לבשו חרים הצאן בזמן שיתרו אף ישירו. ויקנמי דמקו יטפובן. Which means like this. According to Rabbi Meir, that he says the majority of them become pregnant in Adar, so that's why it's written, first of all, לבשו חרים הצאן during the time of המכים יטפובן, right? And then sometimes you have the minority. What's the minority? Yitru af yashiru, because that's the order of the pasuk. But if you're going to tell me like Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon, which means that they become pregnant during the time of Nisan, so then it would have been the opposite. Lavshu charim chatzon when bizman yitru af yashiru, which is during the time of Nisan. But sometimes there's also there's some of them which are feisty that they do earlier, but that means the pasuk should have been worded in a different order, right? That's what it should have been done. So Rava says, everyone agrees that it's going to be Badar. So what is the machloket then between them? Aser ta'aser bishne ma'asrot ha'ketuv medaber. The Torah says, Aser ta'aser. What does that mean? Aser bishvil shetitasher. Yeah, give ma'aser in order to become rich. Right? You give the 20%, you become rich. Yeah? So he says, bishne ma'asrot ha'ketuv medaber. Torah is talking about two different things. Maaser dagan. Maaser behema, maaser dagan. Maaser on animals and maaser on produce. We give two different types of maaser, on produce and on animals. Rabbi Meir savar, Rabbi Meir holds, makish maaser behema maaser dagan. There's a kesh, juxtaposition, which means that since it's written together, they apply both rules together. So maaser behema, maaser dagan is the exact same thing. Just like maaser dagan is samuch ligmaro isuro, which means that when you're going to come and you're going to finish it off, which is Rosh Hashana from Maaser Dagam Tishri, so too Maaser Be'ema, Samuch Ligmaro Isro. So therefore, when it finishes off, that's when you're going to start the Rosh Hashana. Meaning, when you come, when does the Rosh Hashana apply for Maaser of Tvua of grains in Rosh Hashana Tishri? Because that's when it finishes the produce. Meaning, when do you finish the produce? By Tishri time. That's why it's called Chag Asif. You gather in together. You gather in all the different things. That's when you gather it in. So the same thing with the animals. When are you going to come and start doing the Rosh Hashana? When it's finishing off, meaning when they already gave birth, and now you have these animals. Just like Ma'asar Dagan Rosh Hashana Shelo is in Tishri, so too Ma'asar Be'ema Shelo is going to be in Tishri, but not when it actually is finishing off. Meaning, according to the first opinion, it's when it's finishing off, which means that if they give birth, if the majority give birth, if the majority mate in Adar, when do they give birth? In Av. So when is the finishing off time? In Av, so therefore Rosh Chodesh Elul should be the Rosh Hashana. The second opinion held no. It was making a Hekesh, just like one's Rosh Hashana of Tishri, the other one's also Rosh Hashana of Tishri, even though it's 1 month after they already reproduced. That means it's not Mamash Samuch Ligmaro Isuro. It's not Mamash right when it finishes, it finished off the product, now you give off the Maaser. You're getting an extra month. Okay? I still say Tishri, Rosh Hashana L'Shanim. Yeah, that's the Gaon. According to the Gaon, you're only Yotzei Chovah the Maaser, and you only get the riches when you give 20%.
Right.
If you give 10%, exactly. So you give 10%.
I was saying that the same thing is the reason why we learned the
Aser Taser. Yes. Be'echad b'Tishri Rosh Hashana L'Shanim. L'ma'il chata. What's an afkamina? Amar Rav Papa is l'ishtarot. Shitrei chov hamukdamim psulim. Mucharim ksherim. Any shtar chov which is early is pasul. Meuchar is kosher, which means remember what's a shtar chov? I come and I lend them money, and then we write a document. If we're going to write the date of the document early, it's pasul. Why? Because that means I could come and I could collect from any, like it's got a lien on his property from before time, which is pasul. If it's later, it's going to be kosher. Why? Because then I cannot collect anything from which I wasn't able to. So that's going to be the halacha. So ask the Gemara, we learned in the Mishnah, Why did you just tell me that Rosh Hashana Tishri is for Shtarot? We just learned Rosh Hashana for Nisan is for Shtarot. So answers the Gemara, La Kashya, it's not a question. Kan Malchei Yisrael, kan Umot Olam. Malchei Yisrael, it's Rosh Hashana, is Rosh Chodesh.
Nisan.
Nisan, Chazak Uru. And Malchei Umot Olam, Rosh Chodesh, Tishri.
חוץ מ...
Right? Ela, but rather, right?
לא.
Ela, but rather.
מכורש, לא?
No, there was a special, no, because since it was exception to the rule, because he was like Malchei Yisrael, because he was a good king. Ela, Hade Amar Rav Chasta, but that Rav Chasta says, Lo Shanu Ela, right, le Malchei Yisrael. אבל אומות אבל מתיישבים ענינן. רב חסדה מצנית על התשמין, he's coming to teach us a braita. So says, no, רב חסדה קראי התשמין. רב חסדה is coming to teach us a pasuk. that ראש השנה למלכי אומות העולם is אחד בתשרי. if you want, you could answer another answer. רב חסדה holds like רבי זירא מצנילה. רבי זירא אמר לי תקופה. What does it mean? We're talking about the תקופת החמה והלבנה, which means, and the Rabbi Eliezer, which he says is בתשרי נברא העולם. When was the world created? In Tishri or Nisan? It's machloket. Right? So because of that, he holds that Tishri, the world was created, not in Nisan. Okay? So the Gemara is going to say, let's explain. And it says like this. Okay? We were just trying to understand what does it mean? Bechab Tishri, it's Rosh Hashana l'shanim. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak comes and he says, Ledin. Right? We're talking about Judgment Day. When is Judgment Day? So it's Rosh Hashana. Right? Rosh Hashana is Judgment Day. Right? The Chtiv, it says in the Pasuk, Mereshit Hashana v'ad achri shana. Mereshit Hashana nidon ma yeh besofa. From the beginning of the year, we're going to be judged. What's going to happen at the end of the year? So says the Gemara, my Tishri, how do you know it's Tishri? It just says from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, but how do you know that's Tishri? So it says, it says in Pasuk, we have to blow on the shofar in the month, when the word, so he says, Ezeu Chag, Chet Amubet, 8b. What is the Chag Shachodesh Mitkasebo? What is the Chag? There's only one Chag, that there's no moon. Right? Very good. Havi Omer, is Rosh Hashana. Right? Why? Because you can't see the moon. The moon is disappears. Remember, the moon rebirth. It gives birth, Kilu, right? On Aleph, it becomes bigger until 2, right? Tedvav, and then becomes smaller again until Rosh Chodesh. So therefore, he comes. What is a month which is Mitkasebo? It says Rosh Hashana. It's a mishpat. So therefore, it's Yom Mishpat. It's a day of judgment. Tanu Rabbanan we learned to write that Kichok Yisrael Mishpat Yaakov melamed she'em betin shel mala nechasin ladin. We learn from here that since it says Kichok Yisrael hu Mishpat Elu Yaakov, so it's a Chok Yisrael. If Bnei Yisrael don't come and they make that this is now Rosh Hashanah, upstairs they don't judge. But the upstairs they're only going to judge according to what we judge down below. So that means if we didn't make it Rosh Hashanah yet, upstairs they can't judge. Right? Tanya Idach, the other Braita says, Kichok Yisrael hu Eli Ele Yisrael, that's only for Yisrael. Umot ha'olam minai. How do we know Umot ha'olam? Mishpat Elu Yaakov. Right? It's a Mishpat Elu Yaakov. What does it mean? Here it says, Lemi oseh Hashem Mishpat Rosh Hashanah. Mashma, that it's on everybody. So what is the Chok Yisrael? The first pasuk says for Yisrael, but then the first part of the pasuk. But then it's Leil Yaakov. It says Mishpat for everything. He says no. The first ones that go right is first the Jews. So the Jews are the first ones that get judged on Rosh Hashanah. We're the first ones that go in. Then afterwards, right, becomes everybody else. But first, Bnei Yisrael. Rav Chasta, just like Rav Chasta says, Kamar Rav Chasta says Rav Chasta, Melech v'tzibur. Melech nichnas tchila ladin. When you have the Melech and the tzibur, who comes into judgment first? The king. Yeah, the king. I still remember I called up Rav David Cohen. He's one of the big poskim in New York. I don't know if you ever heard of him. Okay, he's a very, very big posek in New York. And I remember I asked him and I told him, listen, I have a question. The first question is to be with me personally, and the second one is for my tzibur, for the congregation. So I said, which one should I ask first? So he goes, Gemara Mefureshet. I'm trying to think, Rabbi and tzibur, Gemara Mefureshet, like, what's he talking about? So he goes to me, no, you have a din of a melech, right? The Marad Atra, he's got a judgment, he's got a din of a king. So he says, Melech v'tzibur, mi nichnas tchila, Melech. Your question first. He took my question first, he answered my question, and then I asked for the tzibur. And then he answered me for the tzibur. Right? But that was a pashut. Melech v'tzibur, Melech nichnas tchila. So he says, Melech nichnas tchila ladin, shneimar, because it says in a pasuk, mishpat avdo u'mishpat amo. Yeah, he says, mishpat avdo u'mishpat amo. First, Mishpat Avdo, which is Shlomo Melech, which is the Eved Hashem, and then Mishpat Amo. So it's Pasuk. Mishpat Avdo, Mishpat Amo Yisrael. Right? We just say it. Right? We say this. You say it. Hello. Yeah. My time. What's the reasoning? Why is it that the king goes in first? First answer is it's not derech eretz. You're going to leave the king outside. Meaning you're bringing in the entire tzibur and then the king is waiting outside. It's not derech eretz. Another answer is he's the first one. Usually they still have mercy. Meaning the king at the beginning, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the beginning, or the first person, whenever you come to judge, you're the first one. There's more patience, there's more this. After a few times, and afterwards, you understand? So it's better that he doesn't have so much wrath. Right? So he says, Velishmitin, Velishmitin. No, that's insensitivity. That's not insensitivity. That's I forgot the word. That's apathy. You're apathetic. Let it do whatever you want. It's not the same. We're talking about when you're judging, yeah. So he says "V'lishmitin," right? What he comes and he says, what does it mean shmitin? Menala, how do we mean for shmita? It says in the pasuk, "V'shana shvit Shabbaton yelaretz gaman shana mitishri." We learn Gzera shana from Tishri. It says in the pasuk, "Mereshit Hashana." So it says the Gemara, "V'ligmor shana minisan." Once if you're already learning shana, why do you tell me shana is mitishri? Maybe shana is minisan, because it says Rishonu lachem lechotshei Hashana. But what's going to be the answer, even without looking at the Gemara? Very simple. One more time. We just said, Uvashana Shavit Shabbat Shabbaton Yelaretz. So we learn, right? Shana from Tishri. Uvashana Shavit is the 7th month, which is Tishri. And it says Menashita Shana. Okay? So why are we learning Shana, Tishri from Tishri? Because Menashita Shana from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So why do we learn Shana from Shana Tishri? Maybe Shana is from Shana from Nisan, because it also says Rishonu lachem lechotshei Hashana. So answers the Gemara, Danin Shana sheni ma chodashim, Nishana sheni ma chodashim. Then Danin Shana sheni ma chodashim, Nishana sheish ma chodashim. It said Rishonu lachem lechotshei Hashana, to the months of the year. There it used the expression also months. The first one was only Shana and Shana. I prefer to compare, when I'm comparing apples with apples and oranges with oranges, I compare the Shana to Shana, and not Shana to somewhere where it's written Chodshei Hashana, the months of the year. I just prefer because it's just apples with apples. Okay? Next, 2 dots. Ul Yovelot for Yovel. It says Yovelot Becha B'Tishri. It says, I thought that Yovel is Becha B'Tishri. Yovelot is B'Asra B'Tishri. It's on Yom Kippur, which is the 10th of Tishri. We're almost done. It says in the Pasuk Yom Kippurim Taviru Shofar. It's on Kippur. Kippur is on the 10th of the month. It's not Rosh Chodesh. So he says, Hamani, who is this? B'Shma Menosh Yochel Roka. The time was learned to write it. What was it coming to teach you? Since it's written B'Yom Kippurim, on the day of Kippur, Yachol, I would have thought to say Shlotemit Kadesh Yom Kippurim Velech. It's only going to be Kodesh from Kippur and onwards. Tamulomar comes to teach you. You're going to sanctify the 50th year. So it becomes holy from Rosh Hashana. Rosh Hashana, it starts the process. Right, the Rosh Hashana of the Yovel. So 10 days earlier. From Rosh Hashanah to Kippur, they wouldn't go to their houses yet. Right? Only after Kippur they would go to their houses. But they don't work. They don't work. Meaning an Eved, he goes out after he became his ear pierced, and from an Eved Ivri he became until Yovel, he stays until Yovel. He doesn't work from Rosh Hashanah until Kippur. Right? That means he's got Din Yovel Keilu from Rosh Hashanah, so he doesn't work anymore, but he doesn't go scot-free until Kippur. So there's a 10-day period that it's grace. And he still stays in his master's house. He's not allowed to go home. But he's free. He doesn't work. You ask him something, sorry, I'm off duty. Yeah? Doesn't work. ולא משתעבדים לאדוניהם, אלא אוכלים ושותים ושמחים.
Thinking if you want to stay.
No. That's after the 6 years. That's for the Shemitah. Once it becomes Shemitah, he decides whether he wants to stay till the 50 or not. But here, we're saying, what does he do? Ochlim, shotin, smechin, they eat, they drink, they're sameach. So they're like free people. Once it becomes Yom Kippur, taku betin b'shofar, the betin come and they blow the shofar. Nifturu avadim lavatehen sadot v'chozor balehen. All the avadim, they go back to their houses, and the sadot, the fields, they go back to their original owners. But according to the rabbis, what did they argue on Rabbi Shmuel ben Osher, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka? What do they hold? Shanim ata mekadesh v'en ata mekadesh chodashim. You're only mekadesh the years, but you're not mekadesh the chodashim. So because of that, it's going to be from Kiddusha. That's why they argue and they say that Shnat Yovel is not until Kippur. Why? Because when we said V'kidash Shnat Chamishim, you're only going to be Mekadesh the actual year, Mekudesh Hashanah, but not from the months. The other writer holds, Yovelhi. What does it come teach you? Matamuluman. Since it's written, I would have thought that since it's going to be holy from the beginning, so too it's going to be holy at the end. So don't be astonished. We always add on from Chol to the Kodesh, meaning on Shabbat. You always add on to Shabbat from the weekday to the Kodesh. So the same thing, whether it's on the inside, on the beginning, and the finish. It's only going to be holy at the beginning, but not at the end. And then the rabbis are going to hold something else, and then we continue with Zat Hashem tomorrow.